science in layman terms for people to understand. Because as I said to you, there's someone in the township who's doing innovation because they found a lack in society and they found a solution. But they don't regard it as science because they don't even understand that what they are doing could be a science, you know? Because we don't know how to speak to people to make them understand that they could be part of the solution. We've been talking a whole lot about academics, and that's why I always say to people, I'm not an academic. I have a PhD, but I'm not an academic. But the thing is that we talk in terms that make people feel like they are excluded from the conversation. Because why does Batabile get to talk innovation and I don't, when I have actually, she has innovated more than I have ever. She has a product on the market, I don't. But we include Batabile because she has a PhD and we believe she knows more. It's a qualification that I have. Yes, I've gathered knowledge enough to have that PhD, but it also talks about collaboration, because why can't she and I collaborate? So we need to create that inclusivity when we talk about such things as science diplomacy. You know, I was saying to someone that we have something that we call the Africa Free Trade Agreement, and we say a lot about it. Even at BRICS, we were talking about it. But who is it working for? Because in South Africa, you cannot have those kind of things and sit and have a panel of educated people and say, talk about this. Because who's going to be the market? It's not going to be me with my PhD. So you need to be able to talk about these things in a way that includes everyone that is going to be a part of it. You cannot open the free markets of South Africa by trying to sell things that I've innovated in my high-tech laboratory. You have to be able to open the market by selling things that have been innovated by the layperson who sits in the township, because his product will have a lot more impact on other people who relate to him and who relate to his problems more than people that relate to my problems.
Thank you very much. I'll give you the last word, Nomandla. Just about, you know, we often get criticized that we teach and we research and we do this, but we don't do enough to create businesses as the South African economy. And there you are. You've got your own company. She spoke about what she's done in terms of creating her own products and company. How do we encourage more young people, especially in the science and innovation space, to create own companies and create jobs in the process?
Thank you. I think something that demotivates people to go into business is the funding issue. I really do think that as much as they advertise all these big grants, the 2 million and so on, but people are not really getting it. I think of which the issue is the fact that we don't have the market, and we always ask whether I should have a product before going to a funder, or I should have a market before going to the funder. Because as a business person, I feel that I should have a product first, and then I'm able to sell the product to the customer, and then which would mean I would need to get funding first for me to have the product. But the funder believes that I should have the market first and then only come to them for the funding, which assures them that I'll be able to pay back whatever funding I get from them. So I love the way we have been funded through the NRF for our degrees, which removes the financial burden from us. It makes it easier for us to finish our degrees on record time. So I think we need to have a similar strategy when it comes to business, which are founded by scientists, where either the NRF can have like a certain portion where they can be some kind of funding that can be used as seed funding to motivate students to, or scientists to go into such businesses. I know with us at UKZN, we have what we call UKZN Incubate. They were the ones that gave me a grant of 80,000 Rand, which I was able to put into the business. DUT has InnoBiz. So I think we really do need those small fundings. And I always usually tell people that as much as we want the millions, we see the millions advertised. Like I've never applied for a DTI grant because they say that it starts from 30 million. I know that I don't have that kind of market. So I always encourage people to use the small grants like the 50,000 from the NYDA and so on. So it would be nice if we had something for the scientists as well, because I think funders also struggle to understand the commercialization of science. A lot has to go into it. A lot is innovation. If something is new, it gets very difficult for customers to accept the product. So we get to struggle a lot. So if we just go to a commercial bank to get funding for our products, and then we are not able to sell the product in the stipulated time. I know most of them usually give us a grace period of 6 months, and then only can we start paying back the money. So they don't understand it from a science point of view. So if us as scientists or the organizations that fund scientists can also have a certain portion allocated to small businesses, I think that would assist.
Thank you very much. That was useful. Can we please give our panelists a lot of love? So ladies and gentlemen, in summary, I think those of us that are involved in government, the science space, whether it's academia or research councils, and even the private sector, if there are any of you here, I think the panelists have said quite a mouthful, as well as participants in the audience. We know what we need to do. We've heard what is missing. Yes, we've covered quite a lot in creating these institutions and instruments of funding and support, but there's a big need for collaboration and communication across. And there's also a need to make sure that the people that we claim to be doing this for be listened to. And for us to respect that actually there's a lot we can get from them in order for us to be able to do what we want to do as the science diplomacy industry. With that, I would like to invite you to lunch. I think it's served downstairs. Thank you very much for your time and contribution.
It's a reasonably priced sugar producer in the world. And basically, we are looking at opportunities to diversify going into the future. So I'm going to introduce our first speaker. He's Andy Church from South African cane growers. He's the manager of technology and innovations, and his current projects include cane juice production project, looking at various certifications and the impact of these on cane growers, carbon sequestration and greenhouse gas emission reductions, as well as sustainable aviation fuel as part of the Sugar Industry Master Plan. Andy is an agricultural specialist with over 25 years of experience and an in-depth knowledge and understanding of agri-businesses, particularly in Africa and Central America. So Andy, over to you.
Need the glasses on. Thank you, Sandy, for those kind and flattering words. Time is against us, so I'm just going to try and get going as soon as we can. Just a little bit about the South African sugar industry. It was established in 1927, and it encompasses cane is grown in 2 provinces, in KwaZulu-Natal and in Mpumalanga. What we call the northern irrigated regions, which is Komati and Malalan, down to Pongola, which is irrigated, to Umfolozi and parts of Felixton. Then it's also grown on the higher altitudes in the Midlands, in the Maritzburg area, and along the north and the south coast. The industry is governed by the Sugar Act and the Sugar Industry Agreement. The Act really just empowers the industry to set its own rules and regulations. And currently, the production of sugar and molasses are the only 2 products that fall within the ambit of the sugar industry. Just some stats just to add on to what Sandy mentioned. We've got just under 400,000 hectares under cane. We produce anywhere between 18 and 20 million tons of cane, producing 2.1 odd million tons of sugar, of which the majority goes into the domestic market, around about 75%. and the balance is exported. Previously, we had 14 mills, and in the last couple of years, 2 have shut down permanently as a result of the tight economic times, so there are only 12 operating. Rain-fed area, which makes up around about 70% of the production, averages approximately 55 tons cane per hectare, and the irrigated round about 100 tons. Just a little bit around the master plan that was put forward a couple of years ago as a result of significant economic pressures that the industry found themselves in, largely as a result of the introduction of the health promotion levy. So we lost a lot of sugar that was previously consumed. The beverage industry reformulated that. And also we had an issue with tariff protection, so we had a lot of cheap imports coming in. But the whole focus of the industry is really to make it more competitive and sustainable and transform it, and to try and look at a value addition around the sugarcane value chain. Just briefly, there were a whole lot of task teams that were put together. I won't go through any of the details, but the most important one is Task Team 6, which was looking at sugarcane-based value chain diversification and coming up with a strategy. As you can see, the master plan covers a wide range of topics, but I won't bore you with those just yet, not today. So going to have a look at the product diversification under Task Team 6. The sustainable aviation fuel was identified as one of the potential products that warranted further investigation. We were fortunate to get funding with the IDC, so it's a partnership between ourselves and the IDC. We all sit on the task team together and are busy working through a basic high-level pre-feasibility to get a better grasp and a better understanding of what is required should we consider going down the SAF route. We also did have a look at this particular task team that I sit on. We didn't look at PLA, but that has also been investigated to a large extent as well. So there's been quite a lot of work done around that. And obviously, any changes around product diversification generally is going to require some form of government support. So the key focus for us around the diversification is really trying to find a home for all our export sugar. For those of you that might not be aware, the world sugar market is a very volatile market, and it is basically a dumped market because most sugar industries have some form of protection or government support. So all their surplus production finds themselves onto the world market. So we, on average, export between 400,000 and 600,000 tons of sugar onto the world market. And the focus has been really to find value added for that particular sugar. So that's where Task Team is focused, and move away from our exposure to the world market. If we have a look at the aviation industry, maybe people aren't aware of it, but they've declared that by 2050 they want to be carbon neutral. And the result is that obviously fuel is one of the biggest cost items and one of the big contributors to the carbon footprint in the aviation industry. So that's where their main focus is coming up with biofuels that have a significantly lower carbon footprint than the current fuel, aviation fuel. In South Africa, there is obviously talk of a carbon tax that's going to come into play. The EU and Corsia have also set out targets around which the various airlines need to comply with. But the bottom line is it's the 2050 target, and the blending of sustainable aviation fuel. The EU have put in various steps. So by 2030, they want 5% of the aviation fuel blended, cranking up to 63%. Each country and each region have slightly different requirements. So we've been trying to understand those and what is the impact that what role can we play, and what's our ability to feed into that market. So this has been the key driver around it, is the fact that the aviation industry have set these goals that need to be met. Just in terms of the task team, where we are at the moment, we've had a look at engineering. We've done a whole lot of engineering work identifying those mills that we could look at converting, instead of making export sugar, converting that into B and C molasses or A molasses. And we've identified the pathways that we need to be following, the ATJs, the alcohol to jet, and producing SPK, synthetic paraffinatic kerosene, a polite way or a long-winded way of saying it's biofuels. And we've got the potential, although it won't be realized, to produce up to 430 million litres of sustainable aviation fuel. We're also busy putting together a financial model to look at the cost inputs. We're also having a look at the environmental and certification requirements and the market considerations. We're fortunate enough in the industry to have what we call as SUS farms, which is a pest management practice which the industry themselves have put together. Any form of biofuels for sustainable aviation fuel has to either be compliant with RSB or one of the other international sustainability and carbon certification systems. So either way, as cane grows, we are in for a sustainability journey and certification in order to qualify for sustainable aviation fuel. Just having a look at that graph around the current forecast levels of production against the demand, and you can see that there's a large gap looming coming up in 2013. And that obviously, in the normal field of economics, supply and demand, the pricing is attractive. So any initiatives that we're looking at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we're better off producing sustainable aviation fuel as opposed to putting it onto the world market. So in conclusion, we have got surplus cane available, but it needs to be justified on the economic side, and hence why we're putting together a financial model. On the legislation side, the Sugar Act and the Sugar Industry Agreement would most likely need to be amended. There'd also need to be significant, well, at the moment, there is actually no government policy around sustainable aviation fuel. We recently attended a workshop hosted by WWF and the Department of Transport, where they're trying to kickstart and fast-track that process to put policies and procedures in place. And the industry would require quite a lot of restructuring should we decide to go down this path. And from a growing perspective, as mentioned earlier, the key thing would be to ensure that the sugarcane that is used for the production of sustainable aviation fuel is sustainable and is certified. Thank you very much, Sandy. If there are any questions, we'll take them at the end.
Thanks, Andy. Yeah, I think that's the way we'll do it. I think we'll have all three speakers and then we'll have a discussion session at the end. So our next speaker is Dr. Kitty Foxon. So Kitty is a strategic research group leader at Sugar Milling Research Institute. She holds a PhD in chemical engineering from UKZN. She joined the sugar industry in 2013 and has been involved in a variety of projects in both established sugar technology and new products from sugarcane. She's currently involved in research to identify biochemicals that can be manufactured from sugarcane factory streams, and she's involved in research on energy management in sugar mills using data science in industrial processes. So, Kitty, thank you.
Thanks so much, Sandy. So good afternoon, everybody. As Sandy said, I'm from the Sugar Milling Research Institute, and I'm going to give you a broad overview of sugar milling and opportunities for diversification in South Africa as we see it. So Andy's already given you an overview. We have 12 sugar mills in South Africa in 2 provinces, producing about 2 million tons of sugar from about 18 million tons of sugarcane. And so that you understand the rest of my presentation, I have to give you a little bit of an introduction to how sugar is made. So incoming cane is first prepared, which basically means smashed to pieces, and then the sugar-bearing juice is extracted from the prepared cane to give a juice that gets processed further. The leftover fiber, which is called bagasse, is then used to produce steam and power, which drives the process. And some factories have extra capacity and can export a little bit of electricity to the national grid as well. The extracted juice is then heated and clarified, and then it goes through an evaporation process to produce a concentrated syrup. And the last and most complex part of the factory is the crystallization process, where the, the syrup is boiled to produce crystal sugar. Now, this is done in a number of different stages. The first stage is the product boiling stage, where you produce your sugar product, and then the lower quality sugar gets recovered in a recovery section and then reprocessed. And the final thing that comes out the end is the final molasses, which contains the bulk of the impurities. So there's your brief sugar processing 101. So in addition to producing raw sugar, we also have 3 sugar mills which have back-end refineries where you take brown sugar produced by the mill and then turn that into white sugar, and 1 standalone refinery based here in Durban, Jacobs, the Hull Ref, which takes sugar from some of the factories and processes that to refine sugar. We also have 2 potable ethanol plants based in KZN, and they use the final molasses to produce alcohol. But in addition to those basic products of refined raw sugar and alcohol, we have a bunch of other things that our industry currently already does. We've got 2 factories that produce animal feed. We have 1 factory which produces furfural and furfural-derived chemicals. We also have a factory which has a wattle extract plant. Now, wattle obviously doesn't come from sugarcane, but because it's integrated with the factory, there's some benefits of having it associated with the sugarcane processing. We have 1 factory which sends some of its bagasse across the fence to a pulp and paper factory to produce paper and tissue. And most of our factories, not most of them, some of our factories have the ability to produce extra electricity. And they either have long-term contracts where they can sell that to the grid, or currently there are 2 programs through Eskom, the Standard Offer Program and the Emergency Procurement Program, which allows them to sell if they've got any extra capacity. So the sugar industry has actually been doing what they can to alleviate load shedding in recent times as well. So basically, it's a remarkable industry if you think about it. We take a really complex, really messy, complicated feedstock, and we process it into lots of different things. But as Andy's pointed out, our industry is in crisis at the moment, and we have to do something different. And product diversification through the master plan and various other fora has really bubbled to the top as the thing that has the best option to secure the sustainability of our industry, and it actually even creates an opportunity for growth. It's not just about survival, but we could be doing so much more. So diversification is built on the concept of a biorefinery. Now, what is a biorefinery? Well, there's some lovely definitions if you Google it, but basically it's a factory, a facility that takes a renewable feedstock and converts it into multiple products, which could include chemicals, materials, food, feed, pharmaceuticals, energy, whatever, and preferably no waste. So a sugar factory already basically is a biorefinery. I mean, we take an agro feedstock and we produce a whole bunch of different things. So already our product portfolio is actually quite diverse. So when we talk about diversification, diversifying the sugar industry, this is not a new concept. But we need to do more because we need to increase the revenue to the industry. And so what can we do? Well, as Andy pointed out, the bulk of our revenue comes from these 3 main products of raw sugar, refined sugar, and molasses. And the one that really has the potential to earn extra money is this export sugar. The burning question is, what can we turn it into? In this value-volume pyramid, so on the left axis you can see increasing value, and the right axis decreasing volume, you can see that basically the sugar that we produce is actually not, we don't regard it as a food, we regard it as a commodity chemical. And that's fairly low on the value-volume pyramid. What's interesting is the 2 things that are most often pushed as alternate products for sugar cane are cogen power and transport fuel. I'm not talking about aviation fuel, that's a bit of a special case. But those are actually lower on the value pyramid. So if we're not wanting to produce those things, then what else should we produce? So 2 years ago, the SMRI launched a project that was funded by the Department of Science and Innovation to identify investable diversification projects for the South African sugarcane processing industry. So essentially, this project looked at diversification from an investment perspective. So not what can we make, but what can we make that will make money. And we aimed as our target to identify opportunities to add value for up to 400,000 tons of raw sugar that would currently be exported. And that, of course, would provide an acceptable return on the investment. And our project focused explicitly on non-conventional diversification opportunities. In other words, things like ethanol and co-generated power, animal feed, furfural, etc. Our industry knows how to make those, so there's no point in us researching them because they already know better than we as a research institute how to make and trade in these things. So we're looking at pretty much anything else. The problem with this diversification challenge is that there are theoretically thousands of different things you can make from a bio-based feedstock. So I'm sure if you've been in the bio-based products space, you will have seen this picture before. It's all the things that is theoretically possible to make from a bio-based feedstock. And from an industrial chemist's point of view, anything's possible. But from an investor's perspective, which of these things are actually going to make money? So our project developed a methodology for assessing different products at increasing levels of scrutiny to filter out the ones that looked like they weren't going to be successful and to accelerate the ones which looked like they had a reasonable chance of success. So we looked at 20 different products, 19 were from sugar, 1 was from fiber, and through a process of elimination we identified the ones that looked more promising, and we took just 2 of those to the highest level of scrutiny to see whether we could make a business case. And our intention is basically to do the same with at least another 20 products in a future project. Basically, what we want to produce out of this is a set of options that the sugar industry can go to because they can see that it would make sense. So essentially what the working group within the task team is doing on sustainable aviation fuel, we want to do something similar with a range of products so that there's not just one option on the table, we can choose the best. So let's assume that we have a bunch of options that look like they could make money. The process of deciding which one is actually not that straightforward. It's not just the one with the best paper return on investment. There's a whole bunch of things that have to be in place in order to make this thing go. The market has to exist. The price and the quality and sustainability expectations have to be things that we can meet. We have to have a technology, so we have to have a technology provider who will either license the technology or come and build it for us or go into some kind of partnership. We need to have enough feedstock to fill the factory and to reliably ensure that that factory is going to have feedstock while it's paying off its capital. And bear in mind that an agro-processing industry has got a varying, fluctuating feedstock every year. It goes up and down. And we also have to have the skills and infrastructure in place to produce the thing, market it, and distribute it. I mean, you can't really have sugar people selling biofuel. You have to work with biofuels people to sell biofuel. We can't do it ourselves. So there's a lot of stuff that has to be in place to make any one of these decisions look like they're worth making. So let's assume that we've identified a product with a sound business case. How would we make it at a sugar mill? Well, you could use the final molasses, like we currently do with ethanol at our 2 KZN facilities. You could use the raw sugar itself. But the final molasses, actually everything that's produced at the moment is already going into higher value products. So there isn't actually a pile of it lying around waiting to be used. And the sugar is actually quite an expensive thing to use. It's very pure, it's already dry. It would make a lot more sense to take something from inside the process. So for example, the A molasses stream, what comes out of the first product boiling would be a really good option. And some of the other ones which sit inside this section over here, there are other streams that would also make good ones. If you take that out, then you could basically chop off part of your factory, and then you've got savings on the sugar making side, and you have this feedstock which is more appropriate for making a new product. You could also make it out of syrup and chop off the whole back of the factory, and you could even make it out of juice. You also need to carefully design the entire multi-product facility so that you've got power and all the utilities that you need to make both parts of it run. And ideally, you want to do that with existing boilers and existing turbines. So there's quite a lot of thinking about how to put this thing together. And that's what Andy was talking about in his engineering studies. You've got to kind of look at these things and work out how it's going to happen. The illustration I've put together now is basically for a standalone biorefinery. So if you've got one factory which is making one product. But in fact, to achieve economies of scale required to make the product prices competitive, it may be necessary to build a new product facility which is bigger than one sugar mill, something like this, or even something like that, really big. And In this case, you would have to consider additional investments for logistics, storage, transport. You might want to consider consolidating bits of different sugar mills to make one big mega biorefinery. There are lots of different options, and these all have to be considered, and we have to compare them and assess them to try and work out what's going to make the most sense, what's going to be practical, and what's going to give a reasonable return on investment. And then the last thing that I wanted to talk about, Andy's actually already spoken about, is the legislative framework. So we are regulated by the Sugar Act, and one of the things the Sugar Act does is it establishes a sugar industry agreement, which basically defines what products the sugar industry sells, the formula at which they would be sold, and then how the money gets divided between the growers and the millers. And the difficulty that we have at the moment is that the sugar industry agreement only considers the final raw sugar and the molasses as industry products. So if we want to make anything from those intermediate streams that I pointed out, then this sugar industry agreement needs to be changed. And as we speak, processes are underway to look at that, but it's a process that's going to take a little time to get that into law. So in summary, sugarcane really is a remarkable feedstock, and you can make a lot of different things with it. And sugar mills are actually already quite remarkable biorefineries. They create renewable energy, food products, materials, chemicals, lots of different things. But the industry really needs a revolution in the scale of our biorefining to be sustainable into the long term. And we need to focus on which products we're going to make and nail down how we're going to integrate them with our existing value chain in order to make this diversification thing a reality. But if we can do that, if we can do it in an integrated way, if we can get our planning done, and if we can move swiftly, including the legislation, then I believe that we can take our industry to the next level. So thank you for your attention.
Thanks very much, Kitty, for that excellent overview, and very, very exciting stuff ahead. So the last speaker in the session is Dr. Shams Yazdani, and he's from the ICGB, so that's the International Center for Genetic Engineering and Biotechnology in New Delhi. He's the group leader in microbial engineering. His expertise is really in microbial engineering, in synthetic biology, fermentation technology, and second-generation biofuels. His current research focuses on genetic engineering of fungal enzymes for lignocellulosic hydrolysis. So obviously, sugarcane bagasse and trash are perfect feedstock products for this, as well as the production of drop-in biofuels such as hydrocarbons. So thanks very much, Shams.
Thank you, Sandy, and thank you for putting me in this very important session. So I'm going to give you some brief outline of our progress that has been made in the last decade or so due to the funding received from the Indian government, Department of Biotechnology as a special center at ICGB New Delhi. And mainly there were two drivers because of which we went into this particular area, which is second generation biofuels, very commonly known as. One is the reducing carbon footprint. Biofuel will reduce carbon footprint, and to reduce the import of fossil fuel. So these are the two basic reasons why government were very keen to invest in this particular area. And I will try to compare the similar scenario here in South Africa and see how the situation could be learned from what we did in India. So just to give you an idea about in terms of sugar cane, so we already saw some of the numbers, but clearly for every ton of sugar that we produce 2 tons of lignocellulosic biomass, which are mostly treated as a waste, not really used very much. So out of those 2 tons, 1 ton is a bagasse, another ton is basically leaves and tops, which are present in the field. So obviously bagasse is present right in the sugarcane factory itself. You don't have to transport it. So it becomes a very interesting feedstock for producing biofuel right at the place where the sugars are produced. Of course there are some numbers, but basically whatever the sugarcane waste leaves us can give us a very good amount of bioethanol if this could be converted, simply because almost 70% of lignocellulosic biomass are composed of sugar polymer, which are cellulose and hemicellulose. And those 70% of those could be converted efficiently into ethanol with the technologies that I'm going to tell you. And also, not only that you produce biofuel, but also because you are recycling carbon dioxide in the form of biofuel, you are actually significantly reducing the carbon dioxide release in the environment. So this is the, again, these are some of the slides that I took from the internet, so please excuse me if there are some error in these. But basically this suggests the same kind of trend which India is going through, where the internal production is constant for the fuel, and we have to import from outside. India is, much bigger importer than South Africa, but even South Africa is importing 65% of the fuel from outside. So, of course, there is a need to work on the, some of the better indigenous fuel molecule, and I guess those lignocellulosic residues that are available could be a very good substitute. And again, in terms of carbon credit, in terms of carbon dioxide emission, worldwide, we all are concerned about the climate change, and I think every country is responsible globally to make some change in this direction. This 35 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide that are released in the environment has to be, reduced. And as I said, every country is making some contribution out of it, and some of them are more and some of them are less. South Africa is emitting about 435 million metric tons of carbon dioxide. And of course, these are the numbers that will certainly reduce if we try to produce biofuels from renewable sources. So those are basically the reason why we certainly want to work on biofuel production, so that you have a less carbon footprint in the environment. India has already moved ahead, and they have started blending now 10% of petrol as an ethanol, bioethanol. Most of them are coming from first generation biofuel, but now they want to produce more of bioethanol so that they can blend 20% of it. And that is where these second generation biorefineries have been going to be established, which will be producing 10,000 liters per day of ethanol. 4 of them will be functioning by next year. One is already gone in advanced stage, will be starting this year itself in Panipat via IOCL, which is a public sector oil manufacturing companies. So these are something that will help India to achieve 20% blending by 2025. So they are actually moving quite fast in this direction. And in terms of, obviously from 10% to 20% would not happen by first generation biofuel, because India won't do that because the food competitions, they have to use lignocellulosic biomass to convert those into the fuel molecule. So if you just look at a simple flow diagram of how lignocellulosic biomass is converted into bioethanol, it's basically a pretreatment, which is mostly thermochemical at this moment, either acid or alkali. And then there's a saccharification step. This step is to remove lignin. Then we have a saccharification so that we can hydrolyze those cellulose and hemicellulose into sugar, and which could be fermented into bioethanol. Sugar is both C5 and C6 sugar, so yeast has to be efficient enough to ferment both kind of sugars. So ICGB had been working on almost all of this step. For the pretreatment, it has been collaborating for the chemical engineers, but these are well-established process by itself. But mainly the cost is on the enzymatic saccharification, which is a biological process, as well as some of them on C5, C6 fermentation. So about the work of a decade almost, where ICGB started looking at bioprospecting, looking at different bacterial fungal isolates to find out the best enzymes that can hydrolyze the biomass. And for that, we made a lot of different models, including some of the mathematical model to screen. Government funded us a liquid handling system, high throughput, robotic, and a good mass spectrometry to find out the best enzymes. We eventually selected one of the fungus, which we could take it forward in terms of engineering the genome. We kind of removed the repression of enzymes. We overexpressed some of the enhancer and some of the key enzymes so that eventually we increase the enzyme production to a fairly competitive level to what is there in the market. And we eventually also worked with a project on looking at the sugarcane bagasse. This was a project funded by Indo-UK government, and that led to a development of a very good technology to convert sugarcane bagasse into sugar and into further ethanol. We compared our technology with the best known enzyme that was available from Novozyme, and actually it was very, very competitive in terms of efficiency. So again, with the help of government, we could scale the technology to a 15,000 liter scale, almost to a pre-commercial scale, and showed that it is very efficient. We are working with the oil manufacturing company to further do the scale up and commercialization. Techno-economic analysis also done to show that the process is cost efficient. We also have a group leader who is working on yeast, because simple yeast will not ferment both C5 and C6 sugar. So there also engineering needs to be done. So Dr. Naseem Gond has worked to engineer the yeast so that it can ferment both C5 and C6 sugar. He also developed a yeast that can ferment molasses very efficiently. So, normally yeast is known to ferment at 30 degrees. So he has developed yeast which is thermostable. It works very efficiently at 40 degrees and convert molasses into a high titer ethanol. So a different combination. He also had developed yeast that can work both on the biomass hydrolyzate and a mixture of molasses to give a sugarcane factory a very good model for mixing the molasses with the bagasse hydrolyzate. So with this, I would stop here, acknowledging all the students and the funding agencies. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Shams. So we can have some discussion. Perhaps, so we visited, my colleague Shailesh Joshi and I visited Shams's high-tech lab in New Delhi. So South Africa is a member country of ICGB, and so Shams has been very willing to share his knowledge and is very open to collaboration, which is a good thing to hear, because the Indian industry is certainly very impressive as far as biofuel blending goes. So we can definitely learn a lesson or three. So I'd like to, just raise your hand if you have any questions, and maybe I can just bring the mic to you. There's another one here. And maybe just introduce yourself before you ask your questions so that we know who you are.
Great, I'm going to sit down.
Thanks,
My
Ben.
name is Ben. I'm from the Department of Science and Innovation. Great set of talks. Thank you very much. First question, if I can ask a couple. First question to Andy is, why are we not seeing biofuel in our vehicle stuff and the aviation stuff? Industry says they want regulatory certainty. Is government not providing that? What's the stumbling blocks?
Thanks, Ben. So the discussion around ethanol has been around for a while, and the bottom line is it does require, from a financial aspect, subsidization, and that's been one of the issues. But in terms of the current legislation, I think there is a 2% blend that you are allowed to put in for fuel. But we would, so we need a subsidy, and we currently right now actually re-looking that as cane grows to get a better understanding around what that subsidy would look like relative is we're really benchmarking it against our export sugar price. So having a look at the export sugar price versus the world sugar price. But we would need potentially similar policies around protection. So you put the legislation in place to say that's what we need to do, and the refiners just import it. So that's part of the reason why we need policies. The Indian government have been very clear. If we look at certainly with the industry and looking in Brazil and India, where they've gone down that road, government have put down very, very clear policies of how, and frameworks around how it all works. That gives investors a whole lot of confidence. It gives the industry confidence. And without that, it's very difficult to take it forward.
Great. A second one, if I may.
Sure, go ahead.
Great. Thanks very much, Kitty. I've read the proposal. I now understand better what was in that proposal. Thank you. So the next step, as I understand, is IDC funding. What, in terms of the pre-feasibility study to identify which of the possible multiple alternative products should be taken forward? What is that next step, and how far does it go as far as you're concerned? Do you get the question?
Yeah, so I mean, I didn't put in my presentation a sort of a map of how new product development works, but eventually the people who are going to take these things forward are going to be commercial people.
Yeah.
And at some point, a commercial grouping is going to get together and say, right, we're going to do a pre-feasibility study, which is a whole exercise. There's detailed plant costing, location specific, blah, blah, blah. In order to put the money on the table to do that, there's got to be enough evidence that it's worth pursuing, because even at the pre-feasibility stage, you can go, this is not going to make it. And that's really got to be down to commercial people. So it'll be people within the industry, probably partnering with IDC, potential other strategic partners who maybe want to come on board to make a particular product. So where we go with our research is to say, we've done a paper study, not based on a specific sugar mill, but based on a generic mill, and with this kind of structure, this number of mills participating, this size production, with this is what we understand the market's going to do, it makes sense on paper. That then needs to be presented to industry, and then a grouping such as has been done with the SAF, which is actually not yet a pre-feasibility, by the way. That's essentially similar to what we were doing in our projects, but it was just spun off because it's kind of a special case. But then people have to say, right, we want to take this thing forward, and then they'll run with it. So from our perspective, what we're a little concerned about is that SAF, it does look really interesting, but then there's a bunch of other things which also look really interesting. They've all got different challenges, they've all got different scales, different benefits, different return on investment, different people who are going to be involved. And what we would like from SMRI's side is to have a number of options on the table for comparison, because then you can actually assess whether something is better than the other and put them all on a consistent basis. So that's what we're trying to do. I think I've sort of answered a slightly different question as well. Did I get to the question you were asking for? Good.
Thank you. And 1.5 more. Just to follow up, Kitty, you're working with big industry, and big industry has got particular concerns about certain things. Is there not a role to play in putting out to entrepreneurs this problem with the condition that the sugar industry then buys? In other words, it's just the model for innovation. Do you find that industry is too limiting on this, because they've struggled with this for a long time and they're not making much progress? You guys are doing great, but industry still is very conservative and slow.
It's a really interesting question. I mean, if you have a look at how some other diversification projects have evolved, it has been start in the lab, try it out, take your product to somebody they're interested in, it gets bigger, and if you've got a balance sheet behind you, you can do it that way. What we've found, though, is with everything, literally, I think everything we've looked at, in order to get to a size where you are competitive internationally, you have to be really, really big. You're not talking about stuff that you can do in the lab and grow up from. So there's a size issue, and the South African market for all the products we've looked at would take a maximum of about 20% of production at a scale that makes economic sense. So you're either making tiny niche product for a couple of customers at a price way above the international benchmark, or you've got a really big facility. And as soon as you start going that big, we're 20 years too late. You need to have a technology where somebody's done the drawings and knows how everything fits together, and you pay the price tag and away you go. So I don't think that means that we can't look into the entrepreneurial innovation space, but that's for 20 years times problem. For today's problem, we need to go with known technology, is my opinion.
Great. And last one. Sorry, I'll stop. I just want to emphasize your point, Sandy. South Africa is a member of the ICGB, and the technologies that are developed by ICGB are available to member countries. So you made the point, but I just want to emphasize that it is something that we should be taking advantage of. And so thank you for raising that. The last question is, South Africa's looked at ethanol production, and this has happened around the world, and it's often inefficient in terms of the inputs to the production of ethanol. The ultimate energy balance is negative. Is sugar different? I'm hearing that sugar still needs a subsidy, which then suggests that it's also not an effective means of producing bioethanol. But is sugar better than, for example, maize or soybean? Well, that's biodiesel. Can you comment on that?
Is this question to me? I'm sure sugar should be better than starch for sure, because you simply take it and ferment it as compared to starch where you have to hydrolyze it or glucose before you ferment it. So I think it's all about I was just comparing the sugar price in India versus here. Looks like it's more expensive here as compared to India, while the fuel price is almost same. So maybe, I don't know why these economics are there, but it shouldn't be that way. I mean, what is really driving? To me, India so far has reached to 10% by using those sugars. I mean, the first generation few molasses are there are waste grains are there, but also additional juices that are converted to. So I think if we are just talking about the juice coming out of the sugar cane without processing, if you simply ferment it, I don't think there should be a negative energy. It should be positive, and the world is doing it, so I don't see that as a problem.
There is a question behind you. If you can just hand over the mic and you just introduce yourself.
Thank you. My name is Nzana Maleleki from the National Advisory Council on Innovation. I think looking at one of the slides that Kitty showed was about the biomass value pyramid. And is it legislation that forces you to do things the way you do them, or is it just the price of doing? Because that biomass value pyramid shows that at the lowest you can use your biomass to produce energy instead of going high value products, health and lifestyle. What forces you to keep on banning it instead of beneficiating it? Is it because of that Sugar Act, or is it just your choice because it's cheaper to throw things in the fire?
Okay, so I mean, this is a very generic picture. It's like if you were to take all the different examples and plot them here, there would be outliers. There'd be a lot of outliers. It's a kind of it's a concept. In terms of the burning our bagasse, so if we don't burn bagasse, we have to power our process some other way. We have to have some other fuel. And coal is obviously not a very nice sustainable fuel, and anything else is going to be pretty much equivalent to bagasse, like wood chips or alien invaders. You still got to collect it and bring it to the factory. So it definitely makes sense to burn it. What's interesting though is sugar factories have traditionally been designed to burn all the bagasse, because you don't want, bagasse is not nice stuff to keep around. It's a health hazard. So what arrives, you want to burn all of it. You can redesign your sugar factory to burn much less. You can make it much more efficient. And then you have got bagasse that you can use for other things. But then you have to have a market, you have to have the capital to build the facility that's going to make the product, etc. And, it's complicated, but it's certainly not impossible. And I mean, this is what's happening in India. When you go to their conferences, we have an energy metric of 50% steam on cane. They've got factories running at 28% steam on cane. They've halved the energy consumption through clever design, which is possible, but you have to have something else to do with the fiber to make it worthwhile. So everything's possible if you throw enough money at it.
Yes, but if you excuse me, please, everything is possible. I understand, but it looks like the design is designed a certain way. It was expensive in the first place to build that mill. It was not cheap, unless you say it was cheap to build it. So is it repurposing it? What makes it difficult, or is it just the lethargy of change, resisting change, even when the evidence shows you can produce more? I mean, it's value versus volumes. You use more volumes, you ban, but you need less to produce high value products. I don't understand. Everything is expensive. Even the dress you're wearing is expensive. But because it's needed, they will make it. But if you could walk around naked, they would say, no, it's very expensive to make this dress for this woman. So it's better for her to walk
No,
naked.
I mean, you make a very good point. But you still have to make a business case, and you still got to find your investors. And that's what we're busy with. We're trying to build our business cases and go and hunt down the investors to make it happen. So it's possible.
So there was one last question. Maybe you can just hand the mic over to the gentleman next to the camera, and then we'll wrap up the session because the next one starts at 3:30.
Okay, thank you. My name is Nkangweni Rambau from Big Idea Projects and Advisory. So it will lead to all presenters because I'm going to touch on the market, technology, the feedstock, and the EPC. In terms of you indicated the issue of, there was a slide that you were talking about the market demand in terms of the off-takes for the various products portfolio that I've listed there. I wanted to check on that area of the market demand, whether sugar cane, the feedstock that we have got IPPs, for instance, that are participating in the energy security in the country, since we are facing the energy crisis, whether we've got, as you said, we've got sugar mills already that are in place that are producing alternative energy that we can plug into the grid. That's the first one. On the technology, from the investor point of view, all investors want to invest on the technology that comes with performance bond, tried and tested, something that has been demonstrated elsewhere. I wanted to check whether in South Africa we've got those technologies that an investor can bring confidence into the investor that indeed we can use this technology. It comes with some performance bond in terms of the resilience of the technology, in terms of converting the raw materials, the feedstock, into the products. On the feedstock, you indicated about 40 million residues. I wanted to check the feedstock security in terms of the product portfolio and the other byproducts, whether that will be sufficient year in, year out. When you look at the life cycle of the biorefinery, will that feedstock be produced year in, year out, the security of the supply of the feedstock? Do we have that capacity as the country? And lastly, the EPC, the engineering, procurement and commissioning entities that actually builds such refineries. Do we have industry players with such skills, or do we only depending on the prototypes that we have in various institutions? Thank you.
So to start with the question about co-generated power, if we wanted to really produce like big amounts of co-generated power, it's theoretically possible, but you need to put big investments in the ground with 20-year commitments. And at the moment, and I think going into the future, if you have a look at the price that you'd get for co-generated power from biomass, we come in way more expensive than other renewables. So the likelihood of getting really big upgrades for co-generated power is small. So where we've got agreements at the moment, they typically are things where there's additional capacity that can then produce a bit of extra power for the grid. And, you know, I think I could be wrong, but I suspect that what's happening with the current power alleviation is that they're burning coal. They're not so it's not renewable energy that's being sold to the grid. So it's not something that we're really seeing as being a big investment. There will be bits and pieces, and it will be done where it makes sense. And especially for, like, if you've got a mill adjacent to a village, you know, which is not that close to a power station, it's a great place to produce energy and sell it to the local community, or provide to the local community. So I'm not sure if that answers your question about energy, about cogen. Jumping to your last question around engineering firms. So that's not my game. I'm a researcher. I don't know if anyone else can address it, but what I understand is that you would typically have a technology provider who may be foreign, may be local, and they would work with a local engineering firm. And we have a good number of very well-respected engineering companies who are capable of building these facilities. So there would probably be a partnership between multiple, you know, the project owner, technology licensor, and an engineering firm to build a facility. So I think the skills certainly exist, and I think your other question was around the availability of technologies. What we've seen in our project is we've seen that there are technologies that are research and sort of pilot demonstration stage in South Africa, but we've predominantly looked at technologies that would be licensed from international providers. That's not to say that there isn't a lot of room. We have, as a country, a track record of developing technologies. But if we want to put something in within the next 5 years, then we're looking for something which is already proven at scale. And for that, we've predominantly been looking international. Obviously, ethanol is something that we know how to do locally at scale. But I don't think there's anything else which has a similar track record.
Just to touch on, in terms of sustainable aviation fuel, I mean, that technology is work in progress. So even the alcohol to jet ones, it's reasonably new, but there is technology, but it's all international. I think in terms of feedstock from a cane perspective, obviously we are predominantly dry land, and that is part of the challenge, is that we do get droughts that come along. And so the reliability and the guarantee of feedstock does become a problem. So when we are looking at that, the sustainable aviation fuel and the availability of sugar, we are trying to discount for that. But if the returns are looking good, that is going to be one of the issues, is how do you meet that requirement when we have 2 or 3 dry years of drought. But we're also looking at wanting to expand the industry. That was one of the decisions that the industry had as part of the master plan, is do we just shut mills down and just provide the domestic market and that's it? And it was felt that that's counterproductive and it's silly. So with SAF, there is possibly the opportunity of actually expanding the industry on the back of that. But feedstock is a challenge, the regular supply of feedstock.
Just add on the feedstock supply. So this is a subject of discussion that even we have in our India. So what you need to do is you need to have a facility where you can have a multi-feedstock processing unit. So for example, if you talk about lignocellulosic based fuel, although right now you're focusing on sugarcane waste like bagasse or trash, you also look at any other agricultural waste that would be available. So as long as human chains are there, you will be producing agricultural residues. So feedstock would be available. Now, what are you going to do with those feedstock? Are there any better technology available for processing rather than going to the fuel? Are you going to use it for any other? We discussed in the morning, we heard from Minister, integrated biorefineries, so you might have some other product also coming out of those feedstocks. So those are something that we need to decide internally, but feedstock would be available. So you need to have a multi-feedstock processing facilities.
Well, thanks very much. Please join me in thanking the speakers, and thank you for your participation as well. Thank you.